Welcome, everyone. We're glad you could join us for the third session of our Document Accessibility Workshop series, Getting Started with Presentation Accessibility. This webinar is made available by the Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group. Northwest HEAT is a joint project of the Orbis Cascade Alliance and NWAC, the Northwest Academic Computing Consortium. Our mission is to advance our common goal of ensuring that digital services, systems, and resources are equitably accessible to all users. Our overarching goal is to cultivate a community of practice among faculty and staff who support digital accessibility on their campuses. And to do this, we provide a series of professional development opportunities, such as this webinar, and we share best practices and resources through a collaborative knowledge base. If you would like more information about the work of Northwest HEAT, as well as other workshops in the Document Accessibility series, we invite you to visit northwestheat.org. You will find recordings from the first two sessions in this series, and you can register for the continuing sessions in this series. You can also communicate with us through the poll that we will share at the end of this session. And before we introduce our presenter, we'd like to take a moment to share a few housekeeping details. This session includes a chat, which means you can submit questions to our presenter throughout the session. There will be a Q&A at the end of this session, but you can also use the raise hand in the React menu, or you can even unmute your mic to ask a question during the presentation. This session includes captioning. You will find instructions on how to access the captioning in our Zoom chat. This session is being recorded. The video will be shared at northwestheat.org. Our presenter for the Document Accessibility Workshop series is Michele Joy Bromley, Manager of Digital Accessibility and Content in the Office of Information Technology at Portland State University. And now we turn it over to Michele.
Thank you, Gloria. All right, let me go ahead and take over screen share here. All righty. I'm also going to go ahead and take a moment to open the chat so that I've got that up on my screen and hopefully don't miss any questions as they arise. Good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Michele Joy Bromley. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a digital accessibility and inclusivity specialist with over 15 years of experience in accessible digital design and remediation. I am likewise certified through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals as an accessible document specialist and a certified professional in web accessibility. I'd like to thank the Northwest Higher Education Accessibility Technology Group for facilitating this opportunity to speak with you all regarding presentation accessibility basics. This session is the third in a 6-part series meant to provide you with a baseline understanding of document accessibility best practices. If you were unable to attend the first 2 sessions in the series that focused on word processing accessibility, I encourage you to engage with the recordings when you're able. If you were in attendance or have already engaged with the recordings, some of the material in this morning's presentation may seem a little familiar to you. This is because many of the accessible design considerations that apply to word processing likewise apply to presentation design. Speaking of accessible design, before we get started, I'd like to make sure that today's webinar is as accessible as possible to all attendees. Everyone intakes and processes information differently, so visual narrated presentations may not be everyone's cup of accessibility. Yes, I recycled that gem from last time. With this in mind, please feel free to access and download an HTML version of this slide deck, including all links and references, by navigating to bit.ly/presentation-A11Y-basics +, or by using the QR code on screen. You're welcome to reference these materials during this morning's webinar or keep them as a takeaway reference for further study. You may have noticed that the provided link does not take you directly to the presentation slides. The addition of the + to the bit.ly URL is a security measure that allows and users to verify the link destination via an intermediary bit.ly landing page before proceeding. Finally, as Gloria shared, while there will be dedicated time for questions at the end of the presentation, I welcome questions throughout and will respond when feasible. Okay, so let's get started. As the decorative digital content authoring illustration on your screen suggests, any capacity building or training activity should begin with the what, the why, and the how. Let's start with the what, presentation design. What are we covering here? Document accessibility, sometimes referred to as non-HTML accessibility, is a broad category of accessible digital design that typically encompasses electronic documents, presentation slides, portable document files, and more. We started with word processing because that's where most of us began our digital content authoring journey. But presentation design is just as critical in a higher education environment. A substantial number of the files that we disseminate via email, upload to learning management systems, or display in the classrooms and conference rooms are presentation slide decks, either in their original Google Slides or PowerPoint format, or as an exported portable document file. So why? Why make the effort to reevaluate the way we author presentation slides? Why does it matter? As long as we ensure the visual accessibility of the slide deck we display while presenting, and likewise apply universal design for learning strategies to our delivery, why do we need to worry about the materials? The answer is that because universal design for learning relies on multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. Your audience, whether live or asynchronous, should be able to engage with and respond to your presentation, both your materials and your delivery, in a way that best supports their learning style. One of the most accessible choices you can make in building a presentation is to create an accessible, usable, shareable version of your presentation materials to make available to your audience in advance. This isn't always a popular idea in higher education or in the private sphere. Folks like to surprise, keep people in suspense. And to be fair, many of you only just received access to my slide content today, right at the beginning of my presentation. So there was still some suspense, but I am fully able to, I hope, surprise you and engage you without keeping my presentation materials to myself. The intellectual property rights are still mine, but the materials are yours to follow along, to keep, to reference later. Finally, the how, capacity building, folks. This is where it's at. I won't auditorily describe purely decorative images in my presentation, but I will describe the one I included here. We're talking about presentation accessibility basics today, so I included an illustration of a person lifting weights with stylized Google Slides and Microsoft PowerPoint kettlebells on the floor beside them. While just a bit silly, my intention here is to point out that most of us have already been lifting Google Slides and Microsoft PowerPoint hand weights for at least a few years. When we talk about building capacity in the context of these tools, it's important to understand that you are not scrapping everything you know to learn entirely new digital content authoring methods. You're simply learning to do the things you've already been doing, just a little bit differently. You're leveling up. And ultimately, it's going to make you a much stronger and well-practiced digital content creator and presenter. So diving in, let's talk tools. This might feel like a given, especially in context of this presentation's stated focus on Google Slides and Microsoft PowerPoint, but you must choose a content authoring platform that is capable of generating accessible, usable, and shareable content. Not all presentation design tools allow for the generation of accessible content, just as not all word processing tools allow for the generation of accessible content. Doubling down on the why we discussed earlier, we share our content not only because it would be inaccessible not to do so, but because anyone may have a hard time following along in the moment. Maybe they missed something and they need to return to a previous slide as a reference for a question. Maybe they process information best by actively taking notes, and they shouldn't have to take notes on content that can easily be made available to them in advance. Regardless, this is huge in terms of accessibility and usability. Whether an audience member is using adaptive technology or not, the ability to access and engage with your content via alternative means is critical. At minimum, if you do use a tool that does not allow for the generation of fully accessible, usable, and shareable content, I won't name the tools right now, but I'm sure folks might have guesses, generate an accessible alternative to share with your audience members. Consider a digital handout that contains an accessible version of all relevant content from your presentation. Now, I should note, if you do this, it doesn't excuse you from making your displayed presentation materials visually accessible. Which brings us to the theme or design in Microsoft PowerPoint. Let's talk about it. Whether you're using Google Slides or PowerPoint to generate your presentation materials, it's critical that you generate or select and adapt an accessible theme. Similar to accessible word processing best practices, you must consider the accessibility and inclusivity of your chosen typography and color for every layout. And this is customizable. In Google Slides, you can manipulate typography and color for all slide layouts at once by editing the theme. In Microsoft PowerPoint, you do this by editing the slide master. So for typography, and this may trigger a little bit of deja vu, but you need to select a clear, legible font, ideally sans serif, and try to maintain a minimum font size of 24 point or larger. I know that some of you might be gasping behind your muted mics right now. How could we possibly fit all the content that we need to display in our presentations if we're using 24 point or larger? And the question you want to ask yourself is, if you can't fit all the content you need with 24 point or larger, are you putting too much content on the slide? Should you have more slides? There's often an emphasis on, okay, if I want my presentation to be tight and clean, I'm going to make it as few slides as possible. The number of slides is not as important as the amount of information that you put on a slide and the thought that you put into making that content accessible. The only exception might be using a slightly smaller but still larger font for references or image captions, say 18 point font. Remember, with typography, you're thinking about people with cognitive or reading disabilities for whom a complex, fancy serif font might decrease readability. You're likewise thinking about people with low vision for whom small text would be problematic. For color, again, never use color alone to convey meaning. Here you're thinking about people with low vision, but also people who are blind, colorblind, or deafblind, and engaging with your presentation materials. Color can be used decoratively, but never alone to convey meaning. Imagine once again that example we used from the word processing session. Transportation information is here in red. Lodging information is blue. That chart or table would be distinctly unhelpful to a lot of people. And of course, your second color consideration is contrast. You want to validate color contrast between text and background. Again, for people with low vision or people who are colorblind, in our word processing sessions, we discuss several color contrast tools like color droppers and the Web Accessibility in Mind color contrast tool. There are several out there. The important thing is to validate. Do not rely on your visual assessment or a vendor's indication that two colors have adequate contrast. For example, I didn't need to check the color contrast of the body of my slides because I knew in the theme that I selected black text, that's the 6 zeros hex key, and a white background, that's that 6 Fs hex key. So I know because I chose that color contrast right at the beginning in the theme that I don't need to check it. I did need to check that black text against the slate gray that's at the top of my slides underneath the slide titles. Visually, I look at it and it's enough color contrast for me as an end user. It's a black text against a slate gray background, but I don't know if it's going to be adequate color contrast per web content accessibility guidelines. So I'm going to go ahead and check it with a color contrast checker to make sure. Let's talk layout. You want to use built-in slide layouts when creating new slides. This is critical to supporting meaningful reading order and navigation structure for those using adaptive technology to access your presentation materials. If you don't like the way a specific slide layout appears visually, modify it in the theme or the slide master. Presentations don't allow for the kind of semantic structure that you can build into a web page or an electronic document. There's no heading structure to organize your content. And when you input your own custom text boxes into a blank slide, the reading order for adaptive technology will typically appear in the order in which elements were inserted into the slide, not the visually linear top to bottom, left to right order in which you might arrange things. I see I've got a question in the chat. Can text and graphics placed on the slide master / theme be read on the front end with a presentation? For example, in the use of a presentation for a template with graphic assets or preset text on the back end, since one cannot select the graphics on the front end, Alice always wondered if it is recognized with a screen reader or not, and whether they should duplicate the text and graphics on the front end. That is a fantastic question. They cannot. If you put them in the background, they're not going to be read effectively by screen readers, which can to some degree be used to your advantage. When you are creating a presentation and you apply decorative imagery, so that, I mean, I don't know if I could call it decorative. It's a little boring, but my gray bar at the top of the slide that appears underneath my slide titles, because Microsoft PowerPoint and Google Slides don't yet have an option to indicate to adaptive technology that an image is decorative, you have to put in alt text. So if I left it, then someone listening with screen reading software would hear graphic, decorative. Let's talk layouts for this slide. And it's important that I do that, because if I leave a graphic without alt text, that's going to leave a screen reader user wondering, did this presenter include a contextually relevant image that I kind of need to know about, that they didn't put alt text in for? But what's nice about sort of the nice piece of, of the fact that you might put something into the back end theme and it not be read by screen reading software is that can be a way to have those decorative elements, my gray bar and my black line that appears under my title. But I'm not going to want to put contextually relevant images on the back end. Oh, Alice, you raised your hand.
Yep, sorry, it was my question, and thank you for clarifying that for me. So I know with presentations, sometimes they get used in creative ways, so not always a presentation. So I was asking in the context of using it as a like a storyboarding template or a template that other participants have to fill out. So I'm glad you clarified that, because what I do is in addition to putting it on the back end so that someone doesn't inadvertently delete something and it's no longer templatized, we put it on the back end, but then we make an exact copy of the content that's on the slide master or the slide theme, duplicate it so it's superimposed on top, so that in the event someone does delete everything that's on the slide, they'll still have it as a backup. So that was the context in which I was asking that question.
Yeah, and there are other creative ways too that it can be used. For example, the unit in which I work currently at Portland State University, There are several PowerPoint templates that they've put together in our department, like to kind of keep with a consistent theme. And one of the things that we talk about a lot are timelines, right, for strategic initiatives and projects. And so we have our front office created some really beautiful slide layouts with these graphic boxes, you know, a linear timeline and, you know, angles and colors and changing shades. And one of the things I advise them to do is to take the timeline itself, the design, put that in the theme, right? So that when someone's using the template, they can't like accidentally mess it up. But the text boxes that go on top to display the years and the, you know, and the information, that's going to be on the front end and it can be editable.
Thanks.
And that's one of the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thanks. That's great. That's exactly what we do. We do the text placeholders, but the prompts we put on the back end, and then we just duplicate it on the front end. So
Yeah. Jennifer, looks like I've got a hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Just to go back just briefly when you were talking about providing the PowerPoint slides ahead of time, which makes a lot of sense, and I'm happy to do that. Although sometimes within my PowerPoints, I will have slides that sort of act as quizzes for students, right? That I don't want them to know the answers to because we as a class work on the answers together or whatnot. So would it be a good idea to, for example, ahead of time, provide the slides to the students where they're, you know, without the slides with the quizzes, but then indicate to them that after the presentation, I will provide the full slides. Would that be an acceptable alternative?
I mean, that would definitely be a more accessible option than not sharing the materials. I think that as often as possible, providing materials that folks are able to engage with during a presentation are pretty critical. But there's a lot of methods in that situation. I'm a former college instructor myself. And one of the two different methods that I've used in that scenario is that I distribute a copy of the presentation with the quiz slide removed. I can also, with Google Slides, for example, y'all noticed that I shared an HTML version of my presentation with y'all. That bit.ly link takes you to an HTML version. And on the back end of my presentation, I can hide slides so that they don't appear in the HTML version. So I could hide them and then I could unhide them later. And I wouldn't have to redistribute a new version, for example. So I don't have any slides hidden right now. But there have been situations where I've done like a whole series in one slide deck, for example. And so I'll hide all the slides, you know, for the purposes of the presentation, but then I'll unhide them later after the presentation so that folks have access to the whole thing. So there's a couple of different methods that you could use to still ensure that folks have something to engage with, to follow along with. Perhaps you have a screen reader user in class who's got one earbud in and they're following along on their phone in the same way that other students are able to follow along visually with the displayed PowerPoint. There's ways to share a version where you can absolutely keep that academic testing content private.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we were talking about, and Alice gave some great examples, right? When you're building a template, you've got to customize, right? Like you might start with those built-in slide layouts, but say I'm building a template timeline that I want people to use, right? I might be adding additional text boxes, and it's important to remember that that's something you're going to have to go in and validate to ensure that the reading order for folks who are using your distributed presentation materials are able to engage with effectively with their adaptive technology. So again, if you insert additional text boxes and additional images, illustrations, tables beyond those built-in slide layouts, it's typically going to appear reading order wise in the order in which they were inserted into the slide. So that means, for example, let's say I added a couple images in here, even though I arranged them visually such that I can visually see "Let's Talk Layouts" as the slide title, and then I see my bullet points, and then I see a contextually relevant image. It's possible that someone listening to my materials with screen reading software, or simply navigating through them with a keyboard and using a text-to-speech tool, would hear the image description, then the title, then the body. And it's really important that if you do insert custom objects, you manually get those custom objects back in the right programmatic order. It can be difficult to track, and it can be extra work, but it is absolutely necessary to facilitate screen reader access for people who are blind. So one of the things I strongly recommend, and I'll share that with these presentation materials that I created for this series, I spent more time on the theme than I spent on the content for the presentation. And that's true for me in presentation design, probably 60 to 70% of the time, unless I am reusing a beautiful, accessible theme that I've created. And I do try to create several options so that if I have to create a presentation quickly, I can use an accessible theme. But putting that work in on the front end is going to make it 10 times easier to make your presentation, to validate the accessibility of your presentation before you distribute it. The easiest method for validating reading order in your layouts, and we'll get a chance to practice this at the next session, is to tab into each slide, fresh for each slide, from your navigation pane, and then keep tabbing from element to element. Is the keyboard focus in the order you intend it to be? And if it's not, you've got a little bit of editing to do. So definitely save yourself as much trouble as possible and ensure accessible reading order at the onset by leveraging those built-in slide layouts and customizing the built-in slide layouts to be what you want them to be before you even start putting your content in. This really helps in terms of consistent navigation. It's like moving into a new house before you've finished remodeling it, which is a very personal example to share because we've been in a construction zone for 2 years. And if you do the work at the onset, it's going to be a lot faster. Yeah, Jennifer.
How do the order of the reading, the boxes, the text boxes interplay with animations, right? Because I'll also have like different text boxes and I'll animate them, like maybe I'll have 5 bullet points and I'll animate each bullet point as I'm talking. So do the animations like supplant the order of the text boxes or the other way around, or how do they work together?
No, so animations are a little tricky. I have used animations in live presentations before, but typically avoid using animations in the version that I share with folks if possible. And the reason why is because trying to think of an example. So if on this slide, for example, I had an animation where each of the bullet points appeared one by one. So I've got 3
Right.
major bullet points and the first 2 have sub bullet points. So if I did an animation that had it show each of them one by one with screen reading software, as I'm engaging and moving forward through the content, it would read the first bullet point. And then when I animate the second one to appear, it would read the first bullet point again, and then the second one. And then when I animate the third one, it would read the first one and the second one and the third one. And that can be confusing for screen reader users because they wonder, I went to go to the next slide, but I'm hearing the same slide. Is it broken? And so it can pose some confusion for screen reader users and text-to-speech users. So I generally advise avoiding animations in the distributed version. And that can absolutely mean, as I said, sharing, like it's depending on the presentation, right? This one is a super straightforward presentation for me to give. There's not a lot of animation. There's not, I'm not quizzing you all preview. There's going to be no pop quiz. So I can share this exact version. But if I were going to include any of that in my live presentation, I might go ahead and when I'm done with my slides and I've verified my reading order and my color contrast, I might go ahead and make a copy and strip the animations or like any content that I didn't want folks to have access to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the last two things about layout. Give every slide a unique title. And that actually speaks exactly to the answer that I just gave Jennifer regarding animation, is the confusion when someone is engaging with your slides auditorily. Again, you don't have the ability to do the semantic kind of structure that you can do in an HTML or a non-HTML word processing digital asset. So unique titles, critical for navigation, particularly for people who are blind and using screen reading software or people with cognitive or reading disabilities. Am I on the same slide that I was just on? Am I on a new slide? Is PowerPoint not working on my computer? It can be really tempting, especially in situations where you're talking about the same topic, right? And so you end up getting a little bit more creative and descriptive in your titles to ensure that you've got unique slide titles. So for example, the two most boring slides in my presentation are reference slides. And I couldn't fit them all on one slide unless I used a much too small font. So I've got two references slides, and I simply did references part 1 and references part 2, because I want to make sure that the differentiation between those two slides is clear for someone who is listening to my presentation. And finally, again, similar to word processing, use lists, columns, and white or empty space to improve readability. Empty space especially is critical. You've chosen the larger font size, great, but think about your line spacing. Use bulleted and numbered lists. You want to break up that monotony. When you're using a larger font size, sometimes you're trying to stuff everything in there. And so it's tempting to go, well, let's just do single line spacing. Let's not include a space after each bulleted item. But you really want to still be thinking about that readability, using columns, empty white space, breaking up your content with illustrative images when appropriate. Oh, Kelly.
Along that line, so I tend to do very minimal words on presentations, and then
Beautiful.
but I present the things that I want to present. And when I share slides, I like to share pretty detailed notes that go with those slides. How does that work with readability and the software that folks might be using?
So if you share, it depends on where you're sharing notes. If you're sharing notes via the speaker notes themselves, then you're not going to want to share, for example, an HTML version that I'm sharing right now. Because in the HTML version, if I had like super robust speaker notes, y'all wouldn't be able to engage with them unless I shared with you the editable version of the slides. So it's, I think, absolutely detailed speaker notes, that's fantastic if you're able to share those with folks. But if you're sharing an HTML version of your presentation, you're going to want to share your speaker notes in, say, a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word document. And if you're including the speaker notes, just make sure you share the original file, so the editable file. And you don't have to share an editable version per se, although note that locked PowerPoints can be a little bit trickier to navigate. So it's, if you're sharing your speaker notes, you want to just make sure that you're sharing a version that's going to be available to folks, which in this HTML Google example, that would be an example where it's not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of breaking up your text with things like empty space and images. Ooh, Alice posted a great comment. You can also potentially save the presentation as a PDF with speaker notes included. You can, and it can be fully accessible, but it takes a lot of work, which we will talk about in sessions 5 and 6 of the series. Even when you fully design a completely accessible presentation at the onset using a tool that allows for accessible design like Microsoft PowerPoint or Google Slides, when you export to PDF, there's a lot of validation that you need to go through in terms of reading order, the three we previewed at the last session: properties, reading order, and tags, which we'll talk about a lot more in session 5 and then practice in session 6. But absolutely, you can share PDF versions. You just want to make sure that that's another set of accessibility validation you want to make sure you do. So let's talk images. Alt or alternative text is critical in terms of making your illustrative content fully accessible to screen reader users. All non-decorative images require alt text. This likewise means that if there's no mechanism by which to indicate that the image is decorative, we talked about this earlier, a brief alt text is necessary. Which brings us to the how: brevity. And again, a little bit of deja vu for those of you who attended the word processing sessions. Meaningful alt text describes the content and function of the image, not the image itself. This is an example I shared in the first session, but think about if you're sharing an image on your presentation. I think in the previous example, I talked about putting it on a website or in a document, but you're sharing an image of a person sitting against a tree in the quad or the park blocks at your university, working on a laptop. If your presentation is about the availability of block Wi-Fi in the quad, then the description is going to be a person sitting in the quad using a laptop computer, right? But what if it's a website for your fashion department? You've got I don't even remember the name of it, but there's a whole set of classes at Portland State around fashion and design. The laptop and the location is irrelevant, right? The person is sitting in the quad wearing a tasteful sundress. Fashion is absolutely not my forte, so I should probably choose a different example. But context, right? You want to focus on why the image was included. If an image is also a link, you should adequately describe where users will be directed on selection. Most of all, don't overwhelm listeners with detail. Be succinct. That means when you've got complex images, say you are a chemistry instructor, statistics, matrices and power series, you've got complex images that you're displaying on your screen or putting into your documents or on your websites. The brief alt text, there's brief alt text and then there's long description, right? So if I'm sharing a graph, for example, the data for that graph came from something. And the most accessible version of that graphical data is the data source, the table. So I'm going to have the graphic and my alternative text is going to say, histogram comparing this and this. And to be clear, for those of you who are accessing this presentation auditorily, I didn't actually point to anything. I'm literally imagining amorphous thises. It's comparing two things, and these are the following trends. So I've got 2 sentences. Please refer to the table below for more detail, right? And then I have a table, a fully navigable table with clear header rows and columns and no merged cells, where I represent all of the data such that folks can engage with the text version and the image. Let's talk links. Links. You have to make sure that your links are functional, first of all, and that they make sense out of context. Do not use generic phrases like learn more, click here, read more, continue, or more information. Visible selectable text for a given link should indicate the direction in which users will be sent on selection. URLs as link text should also be avoided unless a URL is relevant content. If folks are unable to follow along with my shared presentation materials, for example, I might say, please reference my professional LinkedIn profile, left paren, linkedin.com/in/MJ Bromley, right paren, for more information. The actual descriptive link is my professional LinkedIn profile, and it's selectable in my shared presentation materials. It's an actionable element, but I've supplemented with a simplified URL in parentheses so that folks can type the URL into their address bar and connect with me in situations where copying and pasting is not an option. Visually, you want to also make sure that active links are not indicated by a color alone. Here I indicate a link with both color and an underline. This is best practice because default color contrast between links and surrounding text will not always be sufficient. Let's talk lists, just a little bit more deja vu. You wouldn't believe how often folks organize their content by simply typing a number or symbol rather than using the built-in list structuring options. More often than that, folks are pasting lists from another location and neglect to ensure that the bullet or symbol they may see on the screen is more than just a Unicode symbol. This is a relatively serious accessibility issue since adaptive technology like screen reading software must have some indication that listed items are in fact part of a list. As a sighted user, when I see a list of 4 to-do items and item 3 instructs me to navigate elsewhere to fill out a registration form, for example, I know I need to come back to that document and that list for item number 4 because I heard it, or rather I see it, right? Item 1, item 2, item 3, item 4. When a list is created using built-in list structuring tools, screen reading software will announce to the user that they've encountered a list of 4 items, item 1, item 2, item 3, heard that it was a list of 4 items. So I know when item 3 sends me out somewhere that I need to come back for item 4. On this slide, I'm displaying 2 apparently identical lists. Visually, they both appear to be lists of 4 items, formatted identically. But the first list uses true list structure, and the second is just 4 items preceded by typed numbers. The latter is not fully accessible to screen reader users. It's also less sustainable and editable for me. It's gonna mess up my formatting. It took me a lot longer to configure that inaccessible list than the accessible one. Finally, let's talk videos. I'm trying to be careful so it doesn't automatically start playing. Oh, someone asked a great question. Or a statement. Regarding alt text for images that include text such as cartoons, it's important to ensure that all the text, yes, within the image is included in the alt text description. This helps make the content accessible to users who rely on screen readers or other assistive technologies. Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy, for pointing that out. You want to keep your alt text brief, but yes, if you do share an image that necessitates it's got text and it's the kind of image like, well, this isn't really an image that I could avoid sharing text, because as often as possible, you don't want to have images of text. So, and what I mean by that is often, you know, when folks are trying to create a cool like banner header, instead of using typed header 1 text, they'll create like a photoshopped pretty like word art kind of thing, right? And that's an image of text. And even if they put alt text behind the text, engaging with alternative text is not as equitable as engaging with actual text. But a cartoon, this is a great example. There's absolutely going to be images like cartoons and logos and other situations where there's going to be text in there and you want to make sure that that's in the alt text. Thank you, Wendy. Let's talk videos. Much like narration for live presentations like this one, any videos you share need captions. Captions should be synchronized, equivalent, and accessible. Captioning is great because while it is absolutely necessary for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, it's also really useful and inclusive for, well, everyone. Second language learners, people who are older or aging, people who are multitasking. On that note, I'm actually going to share one of the Web Accessibility Initiative's Perspectives videos titled Video Captions. It's an excellent resource on the way in which captions are essential for some, but useful for all. And they have a whole series on accessibility being essential for some, but useful for all. So I'm going to switch over here. I'm really hoping this works. So send me very upset emojis if this is not working. audio-wise.
Web accessibility perspectives. Video captions.
Where's my
Video
volume?
isn't just about pictures, it's also about sound. Without the audio, you'd have to guess what this film is about. Frustrating, isn't it? Not knowing what's going on. That's the situation for everyone who can't hear. Captions can't hear.
Michelle, I hear it
Which is
doubled.
make
in
videos
many
accessible.
places.
Sorry, hold on just one second. I
Which is also
apologize.
handy. Web accessibility perspectives. Video captions. Video isn't just about pictures, it's also about sound. Without the audio, you'd have to guess what this film is about. Frustrating, isn't it? Not knowing what's going on. That's the situation for everyone who can't hear. Captions make videos accessible. Which is also handy for people who want to watch video in loud environments, or where you need to be very, very quiet. Web accessibility, essential for some, useful for all. Visit w3.org/WAI/perspectives for more information on video captions. Web accessibility perspectives.
We should be back to the presentation here. Excellent comment, both Wendy and a couple of folks. Auto captions do not fully suffice for WCAG standards. So one of the things you're going to see on this slide is that captions need to be accurate, synchronized captions. And artificial intelligence is getting there. I'll say automated captions are definitely more accurate than they were 5 years ago, substantially more accurate than they were before then. But they're still not going to be fully accurate and fully synchronized without human editing. They're also essentially going to be subtitles. Automated captions essentially come across as subtitles because they're capturing the spoken language. They're not necessarily capturing, for example, I'm doing a presentation on bird life in the Pacific Northwest, and we're talking about different kinds of bird chirping noises. I know about as much as birds as I do about fashion. And there need to be captions for things like, bird chirping. I'm sure it would be more descriptive in an ornithology presentation, or door shutting, tea kettle whistling. So automated captions, they get you part of the way there, but it's essentially unedited subtitling. So you're going to want to make sure that when you share resources, when you share your presentation resources after, but also anything that you display. So I'm not going to choose a video to display in my presentation that was created with automated captioning. I'm going to make sure that it's fully accurate and synchronized captions, and that they're captions, not subtitles. I want to make sure that they've got those, the various sound bites that come with captioning. And there's a plenty of tools for editing your own captioning. One of my favorite things about automated captioning is that it does get you part of the way there. You have something to work with. So if you're creating a marketing video, or say you're giving a presentation, that you can go back in that transcript and you can edit the transcript using a couple of different tools. There's YouTube caption editors. There's several different options out there. Amara is another great one that's available for free. All righty. And again, also the great news is that if you already have captions, you likely already have a transcript, or at least it will be a lot easier to generate one. And fully accurate transcripts should be made available to make videos accessible to people who are deafblind and using a refreshable braille display, for example. Audio files also require a transcript in order to be accessible to people who are deaf or deafblind. Audio or text descriptions for any undescribed visual content. So some of you may have heard of audio description. is necessary to make a video accessible for people who are blind. In many scenarios, this can be accomplished during the design process through conscientious narration. So one of the things that whenever my team is creating a training video, for example, one of the things we put the work in on the front end to ensure that our narration notes include audio description of any contextually relevant visual elements that we are displaying in our training. Because then we're not going back afterward to apply audio description with a tool like you described, for example, because it can be a lot harder to fit audio description in after the fact. I got a question for any recommendations for YouTube caption editors. I mean, I think that when I'm sharing a video on YouTube, I default to using the YouTube captioning editor, the built-in editor. It's gotten a lot better over the years. I think previous to that, when the built-in YouTube captioning editor wasn't as good, I used Amara quite a bit early on. And then depending on what sort of media space your institution uses, ours uses Kaltura. They've got a caption editor as well. Most video storage and delivery tools will now have the option to go in and edit captions. But if they don't, exporting that MP4 file and using a tool like Amara can be helpful. Alrighty, so let's recap. We covered 7 total accessible design concepts for presentations, and I have a sort of surprise 8th concept. Number 1, tools. Number 2, theme. Number 3, layouts. Number 4, images. Number 5, links. Number 6, lists. Number 7, videos. And surprise, number 8, in bold, review. Before you publish or distribute those slide materials, check your reading order. Validate your alt text. Review because you probably missed something. In closing, I'll likewise share, though this moves a bit beyond design and extends to delivery, that there are multiple considerations for ensuring the accessibility of your live presentations beyond the generation of accessible, usable, and shareable content. I'll just focus on 2, just because, you know, we don't have a lot of time. Conscientious narration and available captioning. Someone may be accessing your presentation auditorily only. Any contextually relevant information in your presentation should be articulated verbally. Avoid directional cues like here and there while physically gesticulating toward a screen or a whiteboard. This multiplied by this equals this. That's going to be distinctly inaccessible for most folks, especially in those large lecture classrooms and conference rooms. Someone may likewise be accessing your presentation visually only. So any audio, anything you articulate should be available via captioning at minimum and interpretation as needed. And it looks like I had one more question in there, minimum font size 24 or 26. 24 is my recommendation. But I'll own that as my recommendation as a digital accessibility subject matter expert. There is not currently a minimum font size requirement as a part of web content accessibility guidelines. So one of the things that I looked into, I mean, I knew that 12 point is kind of the best practice minimum for word processing. I'd heard 18-point font. I went to a conference once that required 32-point font, which was a lot for me as a slide designer. So one of the things a few years ago, I reached out to multiple different listservs and was like, all right, folks, what's a general consensus? All you digital accessibility subject matter experts out there. And there's a lot of different minimums out there. I think the most important thing to remember is a clear, legible sans serif font, and try to be really conscious of the amount of content that you put on your slides and try to keep a consistent minimum. I would say really 18-point at the smallest. And I try to keep my minimum at 24-point font because that was kind of a middle consensus of a lot of the digital accessibility subject matter experts out there in conversations over the last few years. Oh, Kimberly, great note. Yes, not all caption type files will work with every software. The examples Kimberly included were VTT, SRT, etc. Captions, transferring caption files between different video sharing programs and softwares, it can be pretty tricky. One of the things when I worked as a captioner, you often have to have several conversion tools. I need my ability to turn this from an MP4 to something else. I need the ability to change this from a VTT to something else. Oh, yes, Daniel, great comment. Daniel says that finding that using Illusion, keeping yourself to a minimum font like 24 point helps to avoid putting too much on your slides. Yeah, that's what keeps me accountable.
I struggle with that otherwise,
Yeah.
personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the reasons why it's so important to do all of that work on the front end, prepping your theme, because oh, I can't tell y'all the number of times that I've picked a theme and I've thought, well, I'll do the font stuff later. You know, I want to focus on getting my thoughts out there. I need to get those into the slides first. So I get all my thoughts in there and I'm feeling really good about the content. And then I go into the theme and I change my font size across the board to 24 point minimum, make my titles like a nice 32 or 36. And then I go back into my slides and oh no. Oh no, my content no longer I'm no longer happy with it. It's no longer pretty or remotely accessible in any way. And I have to rethink what I'm displaying on the slides versus what I'm sharing auditorily. So yeah, doing the work on the front end. Yes. Any other questions? Oh, I lost the chat. Where did the chat go? Oh, there the chat is. Got a great tip from Safia. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. A tip for creating transcripts from captions. You'll notice that the formatting includes line breaks. And they highlight the caption text and paste it into AI and ask it to remove the line breaks. What? Okay, thank you. Such a great tip. Oh, that would save me so much work.
Michelle, do you mind if I share my screen very quickly just for a closing slide?
Absolutely. Let me go ahead and stop my share.
And folks know that the Zoom poll has already been launched, so please fill out our short survey. Our next webinar is session number 4, Presentation Accessibility and Practice. So we encourage everybody to register for that session on the northwestheat.org website. We'll have our events and I'll put that into chat as soon as I stop sharing. And then if you have future webinar suggestions, you can utilize the additional comments question in the Zoom poll to provide us feedback or email info@northwestheat.org. I will also repaste that link into chat for the presentation for those who might have missed the URL earlier.
Thank you, Alice.
That's up. Thank you so much, Michelle.
I am very much looking forward to designing a presentation with y'all in our next session. We're going to start with a blank presentation, y'all. Maybe y'all will help me build a new accessible theme that I can leverage for the next presentation. Oh, there we go. We'll build the PDF presentation together in the next session. This is brilliant.
Work smarter, not harder, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
Or, yeah, well, I guess we'll see. Yeah. How it goes. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Daniel.